And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. This is our 58th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 369th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, January 4th, 2018. I'm your host, Jared Morris, and let's begin this week how we begin every episode of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And this week's banner moment for me comes from Archie Miller's post-game comments after the Wisconsin game, which I thought showed a clear understanding of why we lost. And I thought his face showed everything that you needed to see regarding his disappointment and at times his anger. And, I know, listening to some people this week, Kent Sterling in particular, he said maybe it would help if help IU fans a little bit if Archie was maybe a little bit more emotional or apoplectic at times in post-game situations after games like these. But I like how Archie handles himself in these situations. He speaks matter of fact. He holds his team to account when it's warranted. He holds himself to account when it's warranted. And like I said, he can't hide the disappointment on his face, even if he's not going crazy and yelling and berating people. And to me, that tells you all you need to know, because as a fan who pays close attention, I think it really saps your confidence and your enthusiasm when your team plays poorly, and then you turn to your coach for answers and you get either pointless, edgeless coach speak, or worse, you get statements that seem to actually contradict the actual issues that caused the loss. So, people ask what has improved about the team this year, and I would say turnovers and defense are better overall, even if they're still a little bit up and down. But the one other more subtle thing is that, at least based on his public comments, we seem to have a coach who clearly understands the shortcomings of his team. And we're going to talk about one specific one coming up here in a bit that he mentioned during that post-game talk. Now, whether he can fix the issues this season is a whole other story, and what kind of personal relationships he has with players and what ability he has to push their buttons, there's no real way of knowing. But improvement starts with understanding your team's most glaring issues, nuanced as they may be, and Archie, at least based on what we hear him say, seems to have a handle on that. All right, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left, we have one of the world's most respected bracketologists and the longtime president of the Robert Johnson Fan Club. He is Andy Bottoms. Andy, what is your Bottoms line on the past week in IU basketball?
It's probably good that we had an extra, I don't know, extra is maybe not the right word, but a day in between the end of the game and the show. And I think it's kind of given me time to digest a lot of different perspectives on the Wisconsin game, which obviously was really disappointing. And I think we touched on it a lot. I asked not to have to speak about it anymore tonight, but I think it's kind of given at least some chance to digest it. I think it'll make for probably some good discussion tonight, but just the different angles and kind of reaching out to people to see, what angles they want us to take was interesting, because there's a whole lot of them, a laundry list. In fact, and I think that makes it hard to figure out how to, and maybe that's why some of the fans are upset. It's like you don't really quite know how to feel, because I think there are so many, different components of this and different places that you might point the finger or things that you think might be the root cause. And ultimately, a lot of things to be frustrated by. That might be covering up some things to feel good about, but it's been kind of an interesting couple of days hearing how different people have reacted to it in different ways, and I think it'll make for some good conversation for us tonight, as we've all had an extra day to process as much as we probably tried not to think about it as soon as the game got over.
Absolutely. And to my right, we have a man who is certain that with his advanced knowledge of Ethan Happ's go-to moves, he could have held Happ to, say, 27 points on Tuesday night. He's a columnist for The Big Lead, and he is a self-proclaimed shot doctor who continues to maintain his open invitation for any Hoosiers to come out to San Diego to work with him, and who humbly promises, according to his marketing pamphlet, which I'm holding right now, to help you go from shooting like Haris Muyezinovich to shooting like Nick Zeisloft at the barn in just one afternoon of work. He is Ryan Phillips. Ryan, what is your rant from the past week in Indiana basketball?
Wow, you really went deep there with the Haris Muyezinovich reference. Well done, my friend. Out of Joliet Junior College, no less. I think it's just there's not much of a rant, because I'm just kind of despondent after that loss to Wisconsin. I just want this team to come out and play well this weekend. I mean, the barn is not an easy place to play, but that's a vulnerable team in Minnesota they could really beat. And I just want them to come out and play like they want to win a game. And I just haven't felt like that in some of these games, and particularly Fort Wayne and then Wisconsin. It just felt like there was a resignation that, well, we're not going to win this game, so let's rest up for the next one. And that's not how you play basketball. This isn't the NBA where by the fourth quarter, all the stars want out of a blowout. You got to, put some effort in and prove that you belong and prove that you care. I mean, as the team's former coach used to say, prove that the name on the front of the jersey means something, and there's a reason Indiana doesn't have names on the back. It's about the team, and it's about, playing for IU and playing for Indiana basketball. And I want to see some of these kids play with some pride. I don't care who it is, whether it's the last guy off the bench or whether it's the senior starting guards. I mean, someone needs to play like they want to win, and somebody needs to be scrappy enough to get these guys going and be a vocal leader and a leader by example, both, which is something that they really don't seem to have right now.
All right, well, here's what we are going to discuss this week. We're going to talk about Archie Miller's biggest challenge, as I just mentioned, as revealed in his post-game comments against Wisconsin. I look forward to getting Andy and Ryan's thoughts on that. We'll also talk about the two biggest issues that have put us in this position where a lot of people are freaking out after a bad second half in Madison. And then we're going to address a bunch of the topics that you asked us to cover, comparing IU to Ohio State and Illinois, both with new coaches, the notion of benching players, overall player grades, more. We're going to get to as much of that as we have time for, all of that here on this edition of Assembly Call Radio. And real quick, this reminder, the next time that you're looking for tickets to a sporting event or a concert, remember our friends at SeatGeek. You can download their app, obviously, which is incredibly convenient and easy to use. Or if you just want an easy-to-remember URL that will take you directly to the IU basketball ticket listings on SeatGeek's website, use this URL, iutickets.shop. That'll take you right there. For example, do you want tickets to one of Indiana's Big Ten games? You get tickets to the game this weekend in the Barn or any of the remaining games on the schedule. SeatGeek has you covered and at the best price that you will find anywhere. So check out the latest ticket deals on the SeatGeek app or at iutickets.shop. And if it's your first time using SeatGeek, don't forget the promo code ASSEMBLY. Use it when you make your first purchase, and you will get $20 back after that purchase. Again, the promo code ASSEMBLY. All right, you are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Ryan Phillips and Andy Bottoms. So, guys, I went back and I listened to Archie's postgame comments after the Wisconsin game again today. And upon re-listening to it, I really think that one of his statements gave us some insight into what I think is the single biggest issue that this team is facing. So Zach Osterman, our friend Zach Osterman, asked Archie in reference to Archie's previous comments about the team, being low energy, this just being a low energy team. Zach said, or asked him, so in real time, where does the energy have to come from in the game? And Archie answered, I think it's everything, but I definitely think it starts and stops with your defensive intensity. And then Archie went on to cite that Indiana gave up just 30 points in the first half, but then 14 in the first 4 minutes of the second half. And he's like, how did that happen? And to quote him, he said, there's a lack of toughness. There is a lack of intensity defensively. If it's guarding the ball, whether it's discipline guarding the post, rebounding the ball on the first miss, all of those things come into play for 40 minutes at a time. And as I listened to that, it got me thinking about how stark a contrast that is for what especially the experienced players are used to and what the young guys were recruited into, because this has been a program for years that has derived its energy from offense, from creating a frantic pace, from hunting threes, all the stuff that we've seen and that at times worked and at times frustrated all of us. And when things went right, it was often because shots were falling and the other team's heads were spinning. And in Archie's view of basketball, the complete inverse is true. The energy comes from the defense, not the other way around. So when you think about it in that context, maybe we shouldn't be so surprised that the transition hasn't been smooth. And look, we've talked about this, how it's such a drastic difference, but specifically that idea of energy and why these guys seem a little bit low energy sometimes, maybe that's a big part of the reason why, because they're still kind of learning and trying to figure out how to get energy from defense instead of offense. And Andy, I'll kick that over to you first. Your thoughts on that? What do you think about what Archie said there?
No, I certainly don't think you're reading too much into it. And I think particularly for a team that is, I think the other thing is how the team has usually performed over these last few years when they were playing well. I don't think this team was equipped to do at all. So even if you even if some of the comments around, looking at the roster and things like that, I think it was Crimson Cast, posed the question of like, well, if Crean was still here and this team was still running that system, like, how would this personnel fare within that system? And I think the answer for everybody is probably not well. An offense so based on being able to shoot the basketball wouldn't really perform well in that environment. And I think they're not performing well in this one either, in part because of what you said, where, the way that they, their default setting in the past was really to play frenetic offensively and really try to make things happen. And I think there was a stretch somewhat late in the game that epitomized that I brought up on the show, where had chances, finally got a couple stops and took 2 3-pointers that weren't necessarily bad shots under normal circumstances, or maybe for, a different set of players, the kinds of shots that you would take in that scenario a year ago, and hope to build some momentum by knocking down these shots. But the reality is they missed both. This isn't a good 3-point shooting team, and they can't generate that energy in that way. But they haven't really been able to adjust to doing it the other way, at least for long stretches. And I think his point about being able to do those things for 40 minutes is important, because what we have seen is there have been times, again, it's Youngstown State, so take that with a grain of salt, but they really came out of the locker room in that game and really forced and really turned the game defensively in that scenario. Really came out intense on that end of the floor, forced some turnovers, got some easy runouts. And even in the part of that Wisconsin game, we're able to do that, where, 2 or 3 possessions almost in a row in the first half, they had nice fast breaks, 2-on-1 breaks. Guard made a nice pass to a guy for a layup. Those are the kinds of ways that this team needs to score, not in transition shooting pull-up threes. And you just see kind of the push and pull of what's trying to go on between what guys are used to doing and what Archie wants them to do. So I think it's a fair point.
Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're relying on guys who are used to doing things a different way, and you'd hope that they would have learned by now how to do it. But sometimes that stuff is organic. It's not coaching. It's, to learn how to build momentum off defense is not something that's innate, and it's not something that just comes to you. I think that for everybody, and I think that some people need to sort of do it for a while to learn, maybe, or not do it for a while and learn, what it is to actually defend for a full 30 seconds every time, and what it is to defend for an entire 40 minutes. And to use that, use a shot clock violation, use a steal, use, things like that to motivate you, as opposed to using the offense, which is easier and more tangible when you're a player to recognize, the benefits of. So I just think that it's something that we had probably all hoped that they'd be better at by now, but they're just not. And it might take longer than we thought for them to sort of change that mentality. And it might be why some of the younger guys at times early in the season, especially, seem to be having an easier time with the system, because they didn't have those other habits to break. And so we're getting guys who have been used to for years building off of offense, and now they're having to try and build off of defense, for momentum purposes, and it's just not happening. And there's stretches where they play really good defense, and you're getting, we've seen more shot clock violations this year already than we saw last year defensively. Yeah. They are playing better defense objectively, they really are, but it's also, it goes away at times, and it's not innate, and it's not, just second nature to a lot of the guys on the team. And you feel like it's going to take some time to get there for some of them. And unfortunately, taking that time might, they might not be here by the time they finally get it, or that it may be really late in their season, in their final season, before they get it. So I think as a fan, you've got to hope that this is something that there's some kind of big revelation coming where these guys turn it around and figure it out. But there's certainly aspects of the team that are much better than last year. But then, of course, there's the things that aren't as good as last year, and that's a problem.
Yeah. All right. Coming up on the assembly call, we're going to talk about what I think are the 2 reasons why the reaction has been so strong since that Wisconsin game. And then we'll get into the topics you wanted us to address coming up next. All right, 14:59 for the first segment. Hello to everybody on YouTube. Nice to see you all here. Nice to see we got a good chat going already. which is always good to see. Okay, so I'll introduce this this topic here at the start of segment 2, and then we'll talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll just start diving into these other bullet points that I put down in segment 3 that people asked us to talk about, because that'll be plenty to go around for the rest of the show.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so segment 1 was 14:59. Let me put it up here. Okay. Cool. How y'all doing tonight? It's good to see you. I know it. You know what? These are some of the tougher shows for people to show up live for, and clearly our live viewership is not as high now as it has been at times in the past. But you, the folks who are here in, you know, the dog days of January, when the team is 8-7, coming off a rough loss, you are the lifeblood of the show. So thank you for being here. This is why we do it live, for you all and for the awesome people who are in the chat. So it's awesome to have you guys here. Andy, is that your Christmas sweater?
It is my Christmas gift from you.
I like it.
I need to wear like 3 of them at the same time. It's freaking freezing here.
All right, Ryan, you're muted.
73 and sunny here.
You can go to hell.
Hey, you're the one who chose to live there.
You make a good point.
Okay. All right, let's do this. You guys ready?
Yep.
Okay. All right, here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. Don't forget, if you ever have to miss all or part of an episode of Assembly Call Radio, there are 2 great ways to catch up. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for Assembly Call. Or you can join our live Thursday night broadcast or watch the video replays by subscribing to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Assembly Call. So, you know, the reaction to this Wisconsin loss has been interesting, because it's not like it's a shock to go up to Madison and lose. I mean, it's happened, every year for 20 straight years. So, I mean, we're kind of used to this. And, you know, it's not like Indiana totally got its doors blown off. I mean, we led at halftime, actually played pretty well for 20 minutes. And yet, you know, on the show, I mean, we were all basically despondent and using words like dispirited and, you know, really, you know, going after, you know, what we thought was, you know, lack of effort, a lack of focus. And then, you know, Andy, like you said, the past 36 hours has been a variety of different perspectives. You know, a lot of people having different reactions. I've been trying to kind of figure out why that is. And I think obviously, you know, just the visual of seeing how the team played in the second half, knowing how limited Wisconsin was. This was not a vintage Wisconsin team. A win was there for the taking. If we had showed, it felt like if we had showed any shred of real want to, and it just didn't seem like we did in the second half. But, you know, I also think there are 2 big kind of lingering issues that are causing this reaction. One is the losses to Indiana State and Fort Wayne. I think those still linger. And, you know, if you don't have those losses in here, and especially if those games are wins, I think you're able to deal a little bit better with that Wisconsin loss. But the fact that, you know, 2 out of 15 performances have just been so unbelievably bad, I think it magnifies any bad performance that we see thereafter. And the other one is unrealistic expectations coming into this year. And I especially place blame on those idiotic analysts who talked themselves into the idealized version of every player and the team, and that made crazy comments like this would be a 21-win team and finish 5th in the conference. I'm not going to name any names about people who said that, but you probably know who I'm referring to.
Probably
myself,
some like fanboy blogger or something like that.
Some fanboy blogger. Myself. And look, you know, we saw a lot of the national media guys, you know, picking Indiana 11th and 12th in the conference, and who knows where the Hoosiers eventually finish. But certainly with what we've seen, the pessimism from the national media heading into the season right now seems like a more accurate view than some of the more optimistic takes that some of us closer to the team had, because I think we thought a guy like Deron Davis would take that next step and kind of play up to his recruiting level. A lot of us thought Curtis Jones might break out, and we kind of thought all these guys would play to the best versions of themselves, when in reality, you know, outside of Zach McRoberts and Juwan Morgan, who really has? A lot of guys have actually underperformed expectations. And so I just wonder if some of us got caught up so much in the coaching change and excitement over Archie and just distancing ourselves from last year that we kind of let our expectations run rampant a little bit. And that's creating some of this disconnect right now where you're seeing this team struggle. But man, we thought the NCAA tournament was possible. And now we're kind of holding the team and the coach to this unrealistic expectation. And it's all, we have the benefit of hindsight. But, look, I mean, we come on here and talk every week and we say certain things. And so, obviously I was as optimistic as anybody. So I just think it bears mentioning that maybe we set the expectations a little bit too high. And it's that the team was never going to be able to live up to it all. Do you, Andy, I mean, do you think those two things are part of kind of the stew that has created this seeming overreaction to the Wisconsin loss? And yet those of us who are close to it, I think, feel like in a lot of ways it is still justified.
Yeah, it's an odd one. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with what you said. I think when you look at it over the course of the season, I think every time you kind of felt like things might be turning a corner, I think it's, I guess, the lack of progress or the lack of perceived progress, which the things that you said kind of factor into, right? I mean, you start the season, you come out with the Indiana State loss, but then you see some improvement. You get to the Duke game and you start to think like, all right, well, things are turning around. That was an aberration. Maybe that's not who this team is. Play the Duke game, come out, play really poorly in the first part of the Michigan game, don't do well, but you kind of ebbs and flows a little bit more. You beat Notre Dame. You play tough against Louisville for a decent amount of time. You pick up that Iowa win and you kind of walk out of that thinking, all right, well, maybe things are really improving. I'm seeing the improvement that I want to see. And then the rug gets pulled out from under you again at Fort Wayne. And now I think the rope before you start to panic gets a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter each time. So now in this case, they only had 2 good games, but you still kind of start to think, all right, well, maybe this is, Big Ten opener. You're playing Wisconsin. Students aren't going to be there. They're depleted. Maybe it's there. And then you see that performance like that. I think it's
really play good for 20 minutes.
Yeah. And again, you see it. I think it's the inconsistency more than anything and the inability to kind of sustain the improvement and not take steps back within, a 1 week span that I think plays into it. But I think the things that you talked about are kind of symptoms of that, right? Playing so poorly in those games is a symptom of that. Certain players not playing as well as everybody thought they would or improving in the way that they thought they would in the system is symptomatic of that as well.
Yeah, and the problem is a lot of these guys that were on the team last year, we saw them be inconsistent and ebb and flow from game to game with their focus and their energy. And so again, I think we, being optimistic fans like we are, talked ourselves into things that we haven't seen instead of just trusting the things that we had seen. And that's the problem, is we're seeing more of the stuff that we've already seen. And maybe we should have put a little bit more faith in that and not been quite so willing to kind of grant the benefit of the doubt or expect guys to make jumps that they haven't yet proven themselves ready to make. Ryan, your thoughts?
Yeah, here's the reason why I think it was easy to ascribe hope to this team. Preseason last year, there was a lot of hype around this team, and a lot of people thought, hey, coming off a Big Ten title, a lot of key pieces are back. You lose obviously Yogi and Troy Williams, but there were pieces there, and you lose, Zayas Loft and Max Bielfeldt as well, but there were pieces there and guys who had been there and won a Big Ten title, and you figured, okay, they're just going to build, and that didn't happen, and it was a rough year. But I think you could also ascribe that to a lot of reasons, injuries, to certain key guys at key times of the year, all that stuff, kind of unraveled things. And you can look at it and say, well, those guys are still talented and they were still here for the Big Ten title game when you enter this year, or the Big Ten championship. I mean, you've got Juwan Morgan, you've got Colin Hartman, even Tim Priller off the bench. Newkirk was around on that team. Robert Johnson was on that team. I mean, you've got guys who were a part of that team still here. And you figure, well, you know what? I mean, they're only going to get better with time and work, and they just haven't. I mean, Juwan Morgan, I think, is better, but other than that, these guys haven't gotten better, and they haven't improved the way they probably should, especially when you hear about all offseason, how hard they were working and everything. And so I think our expectations were high because there was reason to at least be somewhat optimistic, given the guys who are back, who were on that Big Ten championship team and in key positions. They just haven't performed to the level. And you're right. You were right, Jared. You hit the nail on the head. Guys are underperforming their expectations. Were those expectations too high? Maybe, but they were there nonetheless. And you've got to compare to what they were expected to do. And I think Juwan Morgan and Zach McGregor are the only guys who have exceeded expectations. I'd say Colin Hartman at times has reached them, but I think you have to give him a little bit of a grace period there for the injuries. So he has an incomplete grade so far, I'd say, if you're looking at the grades on these guys. And so, they're not giving you what you were expecting and what I'm sure a guy like, Archie was relying on.
Well, and I think the other thing, I mean, you see so often in college basketball where, the one and dones are obviously a big deal, but you see teams with groups of veteran guys who have kind of grown together over a period of time be successful, maybe not win a national championship, which obviously was never a thought for this team, but you see those kinds of teams be able to, to play well. And you walk into the season with a roster full of guys who, 5 seniors, and a couple of juniors. And you think, all right, well, this is the kind of team that's going to be able to handle a coaching change and those kinds of things because they've been through a lot and all those kinds of things. And to your point, Jared, the flip side of that coin is these are veteran guys who we've seen perform in certain situations. And so I think it was easy to get caught up in the excitement and maybe talk yourself into removing some things from your mind that you'd already seen multiple times and thinking that all of a sudden it was going to be something different.
Yeah, and it's hard.
You just expect the team to mature and get better over time, and off seasons are where players are made, and preseason, like the fall is where teams are made. I mean, that's what they always say. And then the early games of the season are where you build you build it out, and then by the time you hit conference play, you are sort of where you are, and it feels like these guys did not get discernibly better in the offseason. And that's where you're supposed to make leaps as a player. We saw it, and you see it with the guys who go to the NBA. They get discernibly better, in their off seasons and in their work, with their work ethic and with showing up and just working on stuff. And it feels like a little bit, maybe this team had trouble adjusting to the new system of working out or, what they had these guys doing in the offseason. You saw guys get into better shape. You saw guys lose weight. You saw guys, develop better habits as far as nutrition and things like that. But maybe the basketball skills lagged behind that as a result. I don't know. Maybe they weren't able to incorporate those guys individually weren't able to incorporate those two things together. You work out too much. Maybe you're too tired to go get shots up. Maybe if you are eating differently, you don't have the energy to do whatever. I mean, it puts you on a different schedule, and maybe they didn't adjust well to it. That's certainly something that Archie and his staff are going to have to examine in the offseason, because these guys, the next wave of guys, needs to get discernibly better at basketball skills as well as, the workout regimen.
You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Brian Phillips. So, fellas, we got a long list of topics people wanted us to address, and so we'll start hitting those. We will start, of course, with our long-time listener, Pam, who wants to know, Ryan, if there are any new cereals that you are into.
I will say over Christmas, I tried some Kellogg's Smart Start. That was actually decent. I felt really old because I actually kind of liked it. I felt like I was like 104. A lot of fiber, a lot of roughage, good for your diet, good for your stomach, good for your gut, as they say nowadays. That's
sorry I asked this question.
That's what I was going with. I always stick with the classics. I love some Cheerios, Honey Nut Cheerios. Those are always
wow,
a go-to.
He's still going. Look at that.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. Cut him
hey,
off.
You asked the question.
No, Pam asked the question. Actually, I was just relaying it.
The question. We'll put it that way.
Look, if Pam asks us a question, we are going to ask the question. She's been with us for a long time. She has earned that right. So Pam, you
made the decision, Morris. Don't get mad at me.
All right. So let's hit one more of these before we take a break. And Andy, you tell me, maybe this will take us, we'll need to talk about it next break too. But one thing that we've heard a lot of talk about, and certainly people are talking about it on Twitter, is, well, look, Indiana is not the only program that's dealing with a coaching change. And there are some other teams that have a coaching change, and they're doing okay. Ohio State is outperforming expectations, and Butler obviously has a coaching change, and they're playing pretty well. And so let's talk about those and compare those and contrast those a little bit, because, I mean, it's fair to look at those and analyze those, but every situation is different. So I'm not sure any of them are truly apples to apples comparisons.
Yeah, I don't know there either. I think the Butler one, I guess, to me is the easier one first. I mean, we hear all this about the Butler way and all those things. We're just, class to class of guys that kind of gets passed down. This is the way we do things. And so they have a coach who's been part of that system. And I think that one is one where it's kind of what you aspire to as a program, where people will say the same thing about Michigan State. Like, this is, here's the responsibility of you as a player, and that's really what you want to build. So in an ideal world, hopefully IU gets itself to that scenario. That's not where they are right now, but I think
rather than detonating the program every time there's a coaching change.
Yes, exactly. So the Ohio State one is interesting, and kind of looking over their roster from a year ago, there's a few things that stick out to me. One is Keita Bates-Diop is back and healthy. That's, he's playing really well for them this year and had played well in the past as a complimentary player and has really kind of grown over his time there. I think the other thing, when you look at the guys that they lost, you could certainly make the argument that there's some addition by subtraction there. Mark Loving was an inefficient, player, certainly in his last year, just seemed disinterested at times the further into his Ohio State career as he got. You had Jaquan Lyle, who by most accounts was kind of a knucklehead and, ended up, seeing himself out there. We'll see, what he does at his next stop. And then, Trevor Thompson was a decent big man, but I think he put his name in the NBA draft. The guy who I don't really know, certainly didn't get drafted. Don't really know that those were reasonable aspirations. So I think you've kind of got this core group of guys now who does have some experience when you look at, Jay Sean Tate and Bates-Diop and some of those guys. But I do think Holtman deserves a lot of credit for getting them to buy in. I think systematically, just in terms of tempo is kind of an easy way to look at how are they playing. It's not all that different than what Mata was playing versus like I'm gonna throw Illinois out as another example. They had a coaching change and their tempo jumped from, like almost 250 up to 50 now. So just in terms
you're talking about rankings, national rankings.
Yeah, national rankings. So just in terms of how fast they play and where they rank, I mean, that's a huge difference. And they're not playing all that well. They're certainly doing things differently. Defensively, they're making a lot more steals because they're playing faster and trying to do some of those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, they jumped from, last year they were 249th in adjusted tempo to 51st this year. So that's a pretty big change systematically. And I'm not so sure that IU's changes probably could be categorized as quite that big. But I think that might be a little bit more apples to apples. But I do think the one, if you want to point to one and say, hey, this is the one you want to hold up, I think it's Ohio State, just because they don't have a ton of guys on the roster, just in terms of just raw number of scholarship players. I think that was, has been a pretty big challenge. And, I do give Holtman a lot of credit for that. So I think if there's one that's there, that you really want to point to, I would certainly point to that one if you want to, kind of prop up your argument for why that's, concerning, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, I keep hearing people talk about Butler and comparing it to IU. There's a difference. Butler's coach left a good team for a better job. It wasn't like the team imploded and they fired him and had to replace him because of a bad season. When there's a bad season, you got to rebuild and you got to change things up. And really, Butler has just continued. It's not, there's a reason it hasn't seemed like a big change, and that's because it's not. Also, they have a senior leader and a go-to guy in Keelan Martin, who's averaging 19.3 points a game. He returned after averaging 16 points a game and being pretty much their go-to guy at times last year. So they already had a built-in leader to keep that team together and focused and everything. And then they just, everybody else around him improved. So it's not like it was a catastrophic season last year that they had to replace something like IU basically had. And so I would say that's a big difference. And I think that with Ohio State, again, you've got guys there who are performing above expectations where Indiana is not. And you mentioned Keita Bates-Diop, Jay Sean Tate. I mean, they've had guys who've been there before and have been successful. Bates-Diop could have been good last year, but as you mentioned, he was injured most of the year. So we don't know. He could have, it could have been a situation where this wouldn't be surprising. Look, these situations are never identical. And I think you can't just say, oh, well, they have a new coach. Oh, well, they have a new coach. Let's compare them. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that are different. Sometimes you move into a situation where there's a lot of guys who fit your system. Sometimes you don't. And I think that we're seeing the latter here right now with Archie Miller.
Yeah, just one quick thing to jump in on here. So they've got a guard, CJ Jackson, who I think was a JUCO transfer maybe last year. I think he shows up as a junior this year, but he played last year as a sophomore. I'm just looking on the KenPom page, and he's scoring a lot of points for them and playing pretty well. But I went back and just kind of did a quick search, saw an article where Holtman basically took him out of the starting lineup for the two Big Ten games in early December because he had turned the ball over 12 times in the prior two games. In the games against Clemson and Butler, they lost both of them. He had turned the ball over 12 times, took him out, benched him to start the game. he responded in those games by still playing a good number of minutes, played 54 minutes over the course of those 2 games, scored in double figures in both games, and had 3 combined turnovers in both games. So for whatever reason, people want to talk about, if Archie Miller, needs to be harder on these guys and not play people. What you want to see is the player respond. We've seen Miller take guys out of games for making mistakes. We've seen him sit guys for extended periods of time, and I don't think the response has always been what you want. So maybe he needs to start pushing different buttons than that. But I think it's a good example of, for whatever reason, Holtman doing that seemed to be more effective with that particular player in that situation than what we've seen with Archie and a lot of the guys on IU's team so far.
Interesting stuff there. All right, we're going to continue this conversation going over the topics that you asked us to discuss. And Andy, let's talk about that. Let's talk about this notion of benching players and what Archie should be doing. That's next on the Assembly Call. Stick with us. Whew, long segment. 18.
You're the director, buddy.
That might be the longest segment that we've ever had. I'd have to go back and check, but that might be the longest.
18 minutes?
1853. That was a long segment. Okay, so we're at 33:52, so we've got like 16 minutes. So we'll hit these next ones pretty quick.
Imagine if we hadn't stopped Ryan talking about cereal. Who knows?
Yeah, that was the mistake.
Hey,
but
again,
Pam,
why ask that question? You don't want me to answer.
I mean, you could have just given a quick answer. Like,
I thought you were done with
man,
the one part, and then you just got back into you just left him that
Kellogg's
moment of
Smart
opening.
Start. That's it.
Yeah. Well, even if we talked about it, and then you just left in that opening where it's like, well, but you still got to go with the classics, and then he just went into some other
talking about
monologue
fiber,
about
and gut health. I mean,
I was having fun.
See, maybe we need accountability on the show. Like, maybe you should be benched for the next segment for doing it.
I'll shut it down.
Who are you gonna get though?
That's true. We don't have anybody to put in. We're screwed.
Certainly nobody that could respond and play at my level.
Oh, man. Okay, so let's be strategic here since we don't have that much time. What angle do we want to take on this? Because like it is kind of easy to just toss out like, hey, let's just bench guys.
Well, the guys who come in for them have to play well, or you got to put the other guys back in.
Right, they have to play well. And I mean, I still think the best thing that can happen long term is for the guys to figure it out, buy in, and create some momentum at the end of the season. Like, yeah, the NCAA tournament's probably gone, but you still want to win some games and create some momentum and kind of lay a foundation, not just kind of give up and just play all the freshmen and get your corners beaten in. And isn't it?
Let's talk about it. We don't have to take an angle. Let's all discuss our angle on it. Let's save this for the air. I mean,
because I think the whole playing the young guys angle is. I mean, I get it, but do you honestly think that given what we've we can talk about it more, but again, do you honestly think that given what we've seen, like that if there was any belief that would give IU a better chance to win, is there any way that they wouldn't? Wouldn't be,
but it might give them a chance to win a better chance to win in the long run. I think is the word. Anyway, let's go on. Talk in the air. Yeah. Talk in the air. This is a good discussion.
Fine. Okay, we can do that. All right. Test. Here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. Go to assemblycall.com/join right now to learn how to subscribe to our email newsletter. If you want to get more out of being an IU basketball fan, then you need to be on our newsletter list. You will get our weekly Six-Banner Sunday news roundups, as well as our post-game analysis emails. It is all free, and it will make you a smarter IU basketball fan. Again, the URL is assemblycall.com/join. I'm Jared Morris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, breaking down the week in Indiana basketball in the aftermath of the loss to Wisconsin. And guys, let's talk about this notion that's kind of been bandied about let's bench everybody, play the walk-ons if they're going to give effort and play all the young guys. And, people bringing up, the 50-point loss against Minnesota when Bobby Knight benched guys, and the game in 84-85 or whatever it was when, he benched all the starters except for Uwe Blob. And, could this work now? And Ryan, you mentioned something about this on the postgame show, play Johnny Jager, play whoever's going to play hard. And to me, there are a few issues that I see with this. Number one, the notion of just, number one, Archie has been benching guys. So this notion that he hasn't been putting guys on the bench and holding people accountable, if that notion is out there, totally erroneous because he has. But then when you bench guys, other guys still have to play well because you do have games to win. You do have to compete. And I continue to think that while the team is obviously struggling right now, the best thing long term for this season and for the program as a whole is to go through these growing pains, but hopefully guys start to get it in February and late February and into early March. Because even though you may not make the NCAA tournament, you can build some momentum, hopefully, as you go out of this season and into next season. And I just think it's way too early to start saying, like, forget Robert Johnson and Josh Newkirk, play those guys 10 minutes and give Al Durham and Devontae Green all their minutes. I mean, if Al and Devontae aren't earning the minutes, then they shouldn't just go in by default because you're frustrated with Josh and Robert. So I just think that's easy to throw out, and it makes for a good little pithy tweet. I don't think it actually captures the nuance of what's going on or would be the smart thing to do at this point in the season. Ryan, what do you think?
I think that when I said that, and I've said that several times, that maybe, it's a time to give other guys playing time. I don't mean necessarily you start them and play them 30 minutes and play the other guys 10. I mean, put them on the floor, give them a chance, because maybe them being out there will show the other guys how they should be playing. Let Tim Priller run around out there and show some effort. Maybe that'll galvanize people to say, hey, you know what? He's giving his all. Why can't, I should be doing more. And maybe it works.
He dominated Purdue last year.
Hey, you know what?
I believe he was last seen wearing a walking boot. So that if he can play well with that, and it'll be even more impressive. So
it would only add to the legend. No, I think that, you just got to give somebody else a chance to do something. And I'm not saying, never play the other guys again. What I'm saying is, you know what? Give someone when things are going bad during a game, sit them and allow somebody else a chance who works hard every day in practice. And maybe we'll go out there and run around and take a charge or something that'll get guys pumped up and create some momentum and, maybe change things up. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But if a game is going like the Wisconsin game or the Fort Wayne game, I mean, what do you have to lose, really? I mean, there's just no, energy in those games. Put somebody out there who's earned it through practice and who's earned it through, just their effort. And I don't think anybody's would argue with that. But no, I agree. You don't throw in the towel on the season, and you don't, just forget the other guys are on the team. But I think that, you give somebody a chance that hasn't had a chance yet, and maybe it helps.
Well, and and a lot of people are mentioning Clifton Moore, for example, as a guy that they want to see play. And as we've all talked about, I mean, if Clifton Moore was showing any shred of being ready for big time minutes, surely he would be in there. Given the depth issues we've had, given the fact that Archie has sat Deron Davis for stretches that haven't been foul trouble related. So, that's the other question is, do you just throw a guy out there even if he's not ready and hasn't necessarily earned it in practice? So, you also have
I think we're getting to the point where you kind of have to. And again, I'm not Archie Miller. I'm not a head coach.
But what if he's not earning it in practice, though? Now you're compromising your standard.
Especially with a young guy like that, maybe the carrot of some playing time would get him to do better. And I'm not questioning Archie Miller. He knows his team better than we do. He does. I mean, he absolutely does. And that was one thing that, while a lot of things Tom Crean did bothered me, a lot of the criticisms of him came from people who didn't know his team as well as he did. So, look, he knows his team. He knows what they deserve on the court and everything. But I think if it gets to a point where you're seeing performances like Wisconsin regularly, then yeah, it's time to do something else. And it's time to throw some other guys out there.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it feels like it's just easy to mix up a whole lot of things here. I think, one of the things I mentioned is we were, sending some emails back and forth. It's like, there's this notion that like, oh, well, you need to put in guys who are going to play hard. Well, I think there's guys who are playing hard that aren't playing well. So how do you delineate between Robert Johnson as the president of the fan club? I guess, bring this up. I mean, nobody is going to argue that he's playing well, or at least not very well right now. There's flashes and things like that. But I don't think it's a case of him not playing hard.
No, Josh Newkirk's playing hard too. He's just not
38 minutes against that. So it's like, so then when you kind of put that lens on it, then you've kind of got this, the buckets of players you could put in. We kind of like prop this like walk-on type bucket up of energy guy who has earned the playing time in practice, who's going to energize everybody. And then you've got the freshman who you're saying you want to get experience. I don't mean this as you, Ryan, necessarily, but
right.
Trying to, these guys need to get experience. Well, Well, in an ideal world, you'd be playing guys who need to get experience, who have earned it by playing really hard in practice. And I don't know that, none of us know, as you said, who that guy is, but I find it extremely hard to believe that if any of the freshmen were playing that well in practice, that they would get more time in the game. And I use Justin Smith as an example. I can use kind of Durham and Smith. Durham, I thought, responded pretty well to getting taken out of the starting lineup. He was a little bit more active, made a shot, played okay, not great, didn't play to the level that he played at earlier in the season. But I thought he, for one, kind of responded well to that scenario. And then Justin Smith comes in, and because he ends up being lost defensively, picks up 2 fouls in virtually no time and really kind of takes himself back out of the game. So I think that's what's difficult. I think, it's easy to kind of throw out these different things. It's like, well, what do you want to accomplish? Do you want to accomplish motivating people by getting guys in there who play hard? In which case the answer is not an easy one at all. Sure. If you just want to play the freshman to get him experience, the answer to that's easy. I'm not sure that people are going to like the result of what's going to happen with that.
Right.
But I think it's just trying to figure out how you balance those things. I think they all get kind of jumbled up when everybody talks about it, and kind of same thing with the whole like playing hard versus playing well. And a lot of guys playing well on this team, as you said earlier, where, if the number of guys that have exceeded expectations, you can count on, certainly on one hand, maybe only on a couple fingers. And so that becomes difficult as well, where the list of guys playing well is so short that it becomes pretty difficult to really figure out, okay, well, I'm going to go construct a roster. Who in the world am I going to put on the floor?
Even the notion of playing hard can be difficult sometimes, because sometimes it can look like a guy's not playing hard and maybe he's just tentative. And I think maybe you're seeing some of that with guys in a new system, maybe in some new roles, that are thinking a little bit too much and not playing with the same level of aggression or speed that maybe we're used to. So I think Robert Johnson falls into that sometimes.
Well, and also one thing about young guys is, especially, is they think they're going 100% when they don't realize there's another gear there that they haven't learned that they can access, and so maybe they think they are playing really hard, but there's just another level they haven't gotten to yet. You see that in college football, you see it in college basketball, and you see it, certainly in the in the pro ranks as well, as guys they think they're going all out, but they just don't even know that there's another level to go to. So it does take time to sort of learn what playing hard actually means.
Yep. All right. Coming up in our last segment, we'll pick up the rest of this conversation and handle a couple other questions that you all asked us. That's next on the Assembly Call. Stick with us. $8:57. I want to get better at my teases. I don't think they're as good as they could be.
That's what she said.
Well, that's a good one. But I struggle with that sometimes. We come on here and we're like critiquing everybody and talking about all the stuff that they should do better, and someone actually sent me a great email the other day and said that in the episode of Podcast on the Brink with Zach McRoberts, I fell into this verbal tick of saying obviously over and over again.
Oh yeah. We all do that. We didn't go to broadcasting school.
I know, but we've been doing this for 7 years now.
Nice, Andy.
Yeah, that's solid. You guys are on point right now. But I'm just saying, if we're going to expect these guys to get better and put forth 100% effort, we need to do it. So that's one thing I want to improve on, is I want to improve on my teases, because I don't think they're really very good when I do them in the moment and don't pre-write them out. And sometimes I get distracted trying to play the music while doing it. So it's been long enough with this new way that we're recording on Skype and YouTube. I should have adjusted by now. So I just want to put that out there for myself. I don't want to be a hypocrite.
You don't have to change up the songs.
Yes, and change up the songs.
Sorry, guys, we talked about that off air.
Yeah, people don't like. One person apparently would like it to be more than
he's
just
a radio expert, though.
Well, I mean, look, in an ideal world, we should. In an ideal world, I would love to record all the funny drops or funny audio clips that we say and throw them in at random times.
What, you're so busy?
Well, that's
just kidding.
That probably wouldn't take that long, really. I mean, to be fair.
No time at all.
Just for fun, everybody. Currently, Fort Wayne is losing by 20 to Oral Roberts, who earlier this season lost to Southern Nazarene University. So they've responded well to the
great
fame that came from beating IU.
They're doing well handling success, right?
Yes, yeah, they're doing a great job.
All right, we have we're at 42-49. So let's do some math here. Got to be out at 50 minutes.
I was told there would be no math.
7-11 is good. So 7-11. So 25. So 6:35 we have for the segment. 6:35. All right.
Which piece of this do you want to try to hit?
Do you
I
have anything lingering on that last topic, or can we move on from it?
Let's just move on to a new segment.
I mean,
I don't really.
I would like to hit Brian's email briefly. I think it is interesting talking about, kind of who's overperforming and underperforming expectations.
I like that, but we've kind of hit that though.
Yeah, we did kind of hit it.
We did, and it's a good email, but I also think that could be a full segment on its own in another show instead of one we're rushing to get out.
All right,
I think the leadership angle, I guess, is probably one. I mean, that keeps coming up. I thought the comments that Rab Johns made with Kent were kind of interesting yesterday about like, I think these guys could do it. It was basically, they need a leader, and he kind of was basically speculating like, there's really three potential guys who could do that, and it was Colin and Juwan and Robert Johnson. And it certainly seemed to put Colin and Juwan kind of a little bit above that of like, hey, these are guys who might be able to stand up in the locker room and say, hey, this is how we're going to do it. Things like that. I mean, I think that keeps coming up. And the other thing that I said was like, and some of it rings hollow a little bit of, they stand outside and they say all the right things after the Wisconsin game, all the things that you want to hear. But I feel like if you ran it back and looked at, hey, here's who talked after the Fort Wayne game, it's a lot of the same stuff. Yeah. And so at some point it's, I think that's frustrating. And the whole, whole kind of senior angle up. I think
I like that angle.
Yeah. Okay. Just like, it's about translating those words into action.
All right. I'm going to introduce it and get out of the way, Andy, and you kind of bring that topic up.
Okay.
All right, here we go. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, wrapping up another week of talking about Indiana basketball, as we always do. So, guys, I think we all agree that if Indiana is going to, move past a loss like the game against Wisconsin and more consistently play like they have in their better games as opposed to how they have in their worst games, someone's going to have to step up as a leader, because this has been a program that has been lacking internal leadership. Certainly it was a big problem last year. We've seen that continue this year, which, really shouldn't be that big of a surprise given, the personnel on this team. So leaders are going to have to step up, Andy, and we were talking just off air about that very topic. So let's talk about leadership and maybe who the guys are who could potentially step up and help lead a turnaround as we go into mid-January and into February.
Yeah, and listening to Jeff Rabjohns on Kent Sterling's show on Wednesday, I guess it was, he kind of threw out Colin, Juwan, and to a lesser extent, Robert Johnson is really the guys that he kind of said, these are the ones who guys would be most apt to listen to, would maybe be the most ones likely to, stand up in a, kind of team meeting in the locker room and say, hey, this is what it's going to be like. And I think I tend to agree with that. And I think that's what we've talked about with these guys. I think the challenge becomes that, Colin and Juwan were the guys who talked to the media after the Wisconsin game, and they stood there and they kind of said the things that you want to hear, that they need to generate the energy and it doesn't need to come from the coach and all the kind of things that everybody thinks, and they all sound good. I think if you line that up with the comments after the Fort Wayne game as an example, though, they're probably a lot of the same comments. And so the question becomes, how do you do what you're saying in talking about those things? Because I think that's something that has really, kind of plagued the program kind of post Yogi in these last two seasons, is really having a guy who's going to call other guys out. And I think that becomes challenging. And you start to look at a team with so many seniors and you wonder, you think at some point somebody's going to stand up and say, look, I'm not going out like this. This isn't how my career here is going to end. But I almost wonder in some ways, like, we're at the halfway point of the season. Are we too late? Have we passed the point in time where like that would be a useful, kind of angle for a senior to take? I don't really know, but I think, those seem to be the obvious guys to do that. I don't think any of the freshmen are really playing well enough. That's a lot to put on their plate. And certainly the sophomores, I don't think have played all that well in recent games either. So kind of has to come from that. In an ideal world, it's probably Juwan, because he's a guy who's going to be around next year, and maybe can kind of build that going forward. But, those seem like the obvious guys. I just think that we've kind of gotten to a point where you need to see it at some point.
Well, I'm the guy who opened the show talking about how impressed I am with the coach's post-game press conference and how it's important that at least, he seems to be showing an understanding of what the issues are. Now, can he fix them? So at least those guys do seem to understand what the issue is. And that is the first step towards actually doing it. Like you said, maybe as the season goes on, there's a bit of a sense of urgency that, hey, we don't have many more opportunities left. And yeah, I know, the season hasn't gone how we wanted, but there's always the Big Ten tournament, and there's always, playing spoiler, and there's still a lot of things to play for and setting this foundation. So maybe because of that, those guys can actually start turning their words into actions a little bit more. And maybe as they get more comfortable in the system, it's a little bit easier to just go out and play rather than having to think so much, because I would think with it, when you can do that, you can be a little bit more instinctive and lead a little bit better too. You have more, I guess, mental space to actually be leaders as well. So who knows? I mean, I have no idea what's contributing to it. And the alternative is maybe these guys just aren't cut out to be leaders of a team also. I mean, that is a possibility, because that's what we've seen. Ryan, your thoughts on this? We got a couple minutes left.
Well, I think partially one of the issues is there has been a serious talent drain on this team over the last 2 years. You look at who you've lost, and you've lost from the last 2 years. You've got Yogi Ferrell, Troy Williams, Thomas Bryant, OG Anunoby, all NBA players. You've also lost Zeiss Loft. You've lost Bielfeldt. That's a lot to lose. And it's also a lot to lose from a leadership perspective. While Thomas Bryant was immature, he was a guy that could rally guys and give guys energy. OG Anunoby, some of the plays he made, while he was a very, not an overly effusive guy, I think, to say the least, the plays he would make would give people energy and get people fired up. Then you look at Yogi and Troy.
Even James Blackman with the shooting.
Occasionally, yeah. I mean, and then you look at Yogi and Troy, who were guys that could really yank a guy's jersey and hey, pay attention, focus, let's get this done. Bielfeldt and then Zeislov, a guy who was a momentum changer with his 3-point shot. I mean, there'd be times Indiana being on a terrible run, and Yogi or Nick Zeislov would hit a 3 and just turn the game around. And when you lose those things, it's not necessarily. I do agree that there needs to be a leader, but it's not necessarily all about leadership. It's also about, as we've said before, roster construction and certain roster constructions and having certain types of guys make leadership a lot easier, to do and to perform a leadership function. So I think there's a lot of things going on with this team. And we've got to hope that the next year's recruiting class comes in as a unit of guys who wants to lead and wants to, take ownership of the program if we don't see it down the stretch this year.
See, I think that was a really good point. I think that you responded well to the tongue lashing that you got after the cereal, just the awful cereal segment.
I came off the bench and did my job.
You did. You came back. You responded well. That's what needs to happen. No, you're right. I mean, sometimes the simple answer is the easiest one, right? And this team has lost a lot of talent, clearly isn't as good, and yet it's kind of easy to still hold the team to some of those lingering expectations that we've had from really talented teams.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't hold them to expectations. I'm definitely not saying that. You certainly still need to uphold a standard for the program. And, sometimes you're going to have a year where everybody leaves and it's not going to be great, but this isn't that year. And I think that there should be more from these guys, but at the same time, you do kind of have to look at the bigger picture of the program and kind of understand what's been going on and where we've lost things.
Yep. All righty. Well, that will do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. Or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com/join to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. Beautiful.
I'm going to sign off Skype real quick.
That was a great last point, Ryan. I'm glad you brought it up that way. That was a good way to end it.
I mean, it's
especially because it goes back to the whole energy comment. Like, how do they get energy in the game? That's how they used to get it, but how do they get it now?
Yeah,
they just don't have anybody that can make like spectacular plays. I mean, if you think about,
even Thomas Bryant would make
that are in the NBA. They could just do things that other guys couldn't do. Just
Well, OG would even defensively, OG could make a play that would just make you shake your head. I mean, and same with Thomas Bryant, some of his blocks. And then Thomas would have a block and then he'd scream and like flex. And, guys would get guys fired up. And you just don't see guys doing that kind of stuff now. Maybe Devontae occasionally on a 3, but, those are few and far between.
Yeah.
But, by the way, did you guys see the video we did this morning?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, we do Big Lead Live for you watching. We do Big Lead Live every day at like 1 Eastern. If you want to watch on Twitter, follow at the Big Lead or me. Kyle, the guy who's my co-host on it, did it outside in the middle of the blizzard, and he did it like a weatherman.
Oh man,
it was pretty great. I'll drop the link in the in the chat. It was pretty funny. He was giving us his weatherman thing.
Wow.
And then he proceeded to break down the quarterbacks in this year's draft, but we had to only go 15 minutes because his computer was going to freeze. He's in upstate New York, so it's pretty great.
That's awesome. Yeah, that is awesome. All right, well, we found a way to, I think, talk about some relevant topics without dwelling too much on the Wisconsin loss. So, or the particulars of it. So that's a good point.
Indeed.
Hang on, I'll go to the YouTube chat and drop this in there as well if people want to watch it.
Are you guys both in for Saturday?
Yeah, what time's the game?
4:30 Central, I think.
I think it's
5:30 Eastern.
I think it's like 5. I want to say it's like 5:15.
Oh, is it 5:15?
So it's one of those that's going to start like 20 minutes late because it's the second game or something?
It's hard to tell.
Well, no, it's not the second game of like a tournament, so it'll still start on time. It just could be like.
Well, but just if like there's another game
sometimes
on TV
the TV will push it back.
Oh, will they push it back the tip of those games too?
Like,
yeah,
sometimes.
Yeah, it's 5:15 ESPN 2.
I didn't get a chance to look at, I didn't get a chance to see Archie's radio show tonight, so I don't know if there were any interesting comments there.
I didn't really see anybody tweet anything out about it, so I didn't have time to watch it.
Yeah,
but yeah, I don't know. Well, at least when I played Michigan State, they beat Maryland by about 30 tonight. So
Michigan State is a machine.
Yeah, they really are humming right now.
Man.
Yeah.
All right, gents. Well, this was fun. Always fun to talk to you all. Thank you for being here live. It makes this worth doing.
Thanks, guys.
All right. So I will talk to you guys on Saturday, and we'll talk to you all on Saturday after IU Minnesota. Let's go up there at the barn and get a W.
Oh, that'd be so nice.
What do you say?
Yeah, that's nothing would surprise me at this point with this team. So I rule out nothing.
Hopefully Josh Newkirk has a little bit better barn spatial awareness after last year diving completely off of the playing platform. Yeah. I love the hustle, but I hope he doesn't try and do that again.
I hate that raised floor, man. Oh, we've done that discussion before. I hate sports. It's the worst.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, you also missed it when Jared's intro. He talked about scouting Ethan Happ's go-to move, which is obviously the pivot foot shuffle.
Changing the pivot foot.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
That's his go-to move, man. Yeah, other people were pointing it out on Twitter the other night, which was great.
Yeah, that's always good. That's always good. If only Ted Valentine was the official, so he could. Did you guys see that too?
Oh God,
Joel Berry.
Fucking embarrassing.
He just turns his back to him.
Yeah. What a guy.
It's all about Ted. It's all about Ted.
And then Crimson Cast tweeted another video. I didn't even realize. I think it was from last year. Like someone, or maybe 2 years ago. I don't remember. Someone like makes a free throw. It's an Indiana game, and Colin Hartman's like on the line to rebound, and Ted Valentine just like randomly like smacks him on the behind like really hard, like out of nowhere. It was really random. Like sometimes
nice. Just a little love pat.
Sometimes that looks natural, but it was just so weird. It looked totally out of place.
That is really weird.
Yeah, I don't
Dude,
know.
You're not my teammate.
Yeah.
It's not weird at all. I don't know what you guys think.
Ted just wants to belong to a club.
Yeah.
He does.
All right. I'm out of here, guys.
On that note.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, and everybody listen to Crimson Cast because their latest episode is awesome. It's good stuff. If you like this episode, you'll like that episode of Crimson Cast.
Of course they like this episode. It's us. Come on.
Well, I mean, if they're still here after this much time, I hope they like this episode.
We're just doing this for us, guys. If you want to leave, that's totally acceptable.
Yeah.
This is our usual like talk that happens after we click stop broadcast. But the people who stay know that sometimes we forget that we're live on the air at the very end.
Sometimes gold happens in these rare moments.
This isn't one of them, but sometimes.
No, not
but
at all.
sometimes-
No,
Right.
no, this is
Right.
subpar. This is
We're
subpar.
under delivering right now. But
All right, guys.
All
Okay.
right, we'll see, Ryan.
see y'all.